Hello, this is Mrs. Bradley and welcome to your first virtual revision session, and today's session is just an overview of your literature exam. It's going to feature everything that you need to know about the literature mock exams that are coming up in a few weeks' time. Please feel free to pause the video at any time so that you can make notes or just think about things, or if you want to pause, go and have your tea and come back, that's absolutely fine. So there are 4 assessment objectives that we talk about often. We talk about them for language and we talk about them for literature. They're actually the same assessment objectives, but focusing on literature for now. Pause the video for a moment and I want you to think about what are the 4 AOs. Assessment objective 1, 2, 3 and 4. So pause the video now, jot them down and let's see if you're right. Okay, so AO1 features all of these things. So it's reading the text, like can you read it, can you understand it, can you follow the story and the plot, do you understand the question that's being asked. So for example, in your last set of mocks, did you understand that the question was about Christmas and that you had to write about Christmas in A Christmas Carol? Can you identify quotes, the right quote to support the right point? Do you have a personal response, how you feel about that moment in the text or what the writer's trying to do? Can you explore themes? Themes are sort of overriding ideas or messages that can almost be summed up in one word: family, love, greed, betrayal, violence. Can you explain and analyse how and why characters change and develop? So how does Scrooge start at the beginning of A Christmas Carol? How does his character develop and why? What affects that development? Is it other characters? Is it events? Can you explain and analyse what happens in the story? What happens and when does it happen and why does it happen? And the conscious construct, why a writer decided to include a specific plot point or event. What is the importance of that event? Moving on to AO2. AO2 is the analysis of writers' methods. So for us, our AO2 is a selection of quotes that has been chosen by your teacher that you are going to learn inside out and back to front. Once you've learned it, you then look at the question and you apply that quote. So you can't just regurgitate everything you know about Solitary as an Oyster, for example, but you have to bend that quote in relation to the task. So in what way could you make Solitary as an Oyster relate to Christmas, for example? You can analyse the structure of a text, always a bit more difficult when it comes to our literature texts, but you can do that. You can think about, is it a chronological structure? Is there a flashback? What's the effect of that flashback? Why did the writer choose to do that? Who do we hear from and when do we hear from them? And does the writer change perspective? Do we have one chapter from one character's perspective, another chapter from another? Do we have one character that's outside somewhere and then the next paragraph we're inside somewhere? You can, most often than not, you're going to be analysing the writer's use of methods or devices, depending on what your term your teacher uses. So this includes things like metaphors and similes and personification, alliteration, onomatopoeia, the words used. Why has that particular word been used and for what effect? But whatever it is you're analysing, whether it's individual words, whether it's a method a writer uses, whether it's a structure or method, you should be using terminology. Particularly for our AO2 quotes, it's difficult to explain why you don't know that solitary is an adjective, for example, when you've been learning those quotes for almost 2 years now. So you should use subject terminology. Assessment objective 3 then is context. So here you can think about when the text was written, what was life like then? Can you see this way of living in the text? And why do you think that is? You can think about what life was like for the writer, and very often, you know, the writer doesn't have to be writing at the time the text was set. How did their experience and views affect what they wrote and how they wrote it? So we're thinking about Dickens and his difficult upbringing and how that upbringing affected what he wanted to write. What are the writer's intentions? What's their purpose in writing the text? Are they trying to highlight, promote or criticise? And particularly for our text, that's exactly what they're trying to do. All 3 of our texts, A Christmas Carol, Animal Farm and Macbeth, are trying to criticise and promote an idea. You can also discuss other texts that might have influenced part of the novel, play or poems, such as the Bible or other political writings. And there may also be what we call allusions in the text. This is when the writer wants you to think about something else without explicitly saying it. So when we have some biblical allusions, for example. Moving on to AO4, this is your SPAG assessment objective. So it's spelling, grammar and punctuation. You need to write clearly using capital letters for proper nouns. Use quotation marks for quotes and try to spell words correctly. SPAG is worth 4 marks and is only assessed in Macbeth and Animal Farm. In saying this though, you should try to write clearly and accurately in all your exam responses, regardless of where you're going to get, whether you assign those 4 marks or not. Now the assessment objectives aren't equally awarded, so if you just take a look at this table for a moment, if you have a look for AO1 and AO2 and AO3, you can see that they are uniformly awarded over all of our texts. So we've got Christmas Carol, Macbeth, Animal Farm, poetry, that's your love and relationships poems, and a section called unseen poetry, which you may not have come across yet in your English lessons, but it's where you respond to a poem you haven't seen before. If you look, AO1, so understanding the text that you've been given and the question, and quoting and explaining, is always out of 12 marks. AO2, the analysis of writers' methods, is always out of 12 marks, so they're equally awarded. AO3 is worth half as many marks, so it's out of 6. And then AO4, that's our SPAG, and that's only awarded to Macbeth and Animal Farm. Now, you have 2 exam papers for your English Literature GCSE. You have paper 1 and you have paper 2. So just a reminder that although we cover many different texts, you are only going to sit 2 exam papers. So how should you structure your exam responses? Well, regardless of whether you're doing unseen poetry, your poetry cluster, A Christmas Carol, Macbeth or Animal Farm, you should follow this structure: AO1, AO1, AO2, AO2. And if you look, you can see in red 1 1 2 2. If you just remember 1 1 2 2 for every literature exam response, you will not go wrong. Paper 1, so literature paper 1, features A Christmas Carol and Macbeth. You'll spend approximately 45 minutes on A Christmas Carol and 45 minutes on Macbeth. If we take A Christmas Carol as a first example, you are given 1 question and there's no choice. It is an extract question where you're given an extract from part of the text, a little introduction at the beginning which tells you where the extract's from and what's happening in a sentence, the extract and then the question underneath. Now it's out of 30 marks, and if you can see from this print screen image, there's 1 question that's divided into 2 bullet points. Please don't see these as 2 separate questions. It's 1 question with 2 bullet points of things that you should be writing about. So this example says, starting with the extract, explore the effect of memory in A Christmas Carol. Write about how Dickens presents the effect of memory in the extract, how Dickens presents the effect of memory in the novel as a whole. So they want you to reference the extract, they want you to show off what you know about the novel in relation to memory. If you don't do one of those things, so if you don't mention the extract or you don't mention the novel as a whole, you are capped, which means even if what you've written is the best thing that examiner has ever read, you cannot reach the top of the mark schemes. So you need to bear that in mind. Those bullet points serve as a reminder to you. But how do we set that out? How do we structure it here at Summerhill? Well, if you see in red, we've got AO1 paragraph from the extract. So you just find 1 quote that you really like from that extract that's about the effect of memory in this example, and you write an AO1 sort of PED paragraph. For those higher ability students, you would have 1 main quote, but then you might stack a few little ones to support it from the extract. Your second paragraph then is an AO1 paragraph, but it's from the rest of the novel, with a specific quote or reference. Now, you don't get any more marks for having a specific reference than you do a quote. So if you want to talk about the effect of memory, and for example you want to remember the part where baby Scrooge is alone at Christmas time at the boarding school, that reference alone would be enough. You don't have to remember the quote solitary child, for example, and you write a PED AO1 paragraph about that. Then you're going to write an AO2 paragraph, which is going to be bent towards the question. So you can't just write absolutely everything you know about solitary as an oyster. You would have to bend that towards, in this example, the effects of memory, and I'm going to show you how to do that later on. You may have chosen solitary as an oyster to be your third paragraph. You may have chosen hard and sharp as flint. Either is okay. And then the fourth paragraph, and that's if you get time to it in the 45 minutes, is going to be a fourth AO2 paragraph. So it's going to be one of the others that we've asked you to learn. Your AO3 context, which you can see in green, is going to be weaved in where it feels relevant to do so. So you're not going to write a whole paragraph about the history of the time. You're just going to weave it in. Moving on to paper. To the second question in paper 1, it's Macbeth, and it's exactly the same format as A Christmas Carol. It's one question divided into 2 bullet points with no choice. It's an extract. It's 34 possible marks because there's those extra 4 marks for spag, and it's exactly the same. You AO1 paragraph from the extract, you AO1 paragraph from somewhere else in the novel. You AO2 paragraph bent towards the question. It's likely for Macbeth that it's going to be look like the innocent flower. And then you're going to AO2, if you get a chance, another 4th paragraph. Your AO3 is going to be weaved in where relevant. Paper 2 is sort of a whopper paper, if you like. Now, paper 2 is 2 hours and 15 minutes. You're going to focus on Animal Farm, the love and relationships, and the unseen poetry section. And we'll talk to you a little bit about that in more detail. Animal Farm is very different to the 2 questions we've just looked at. This is because you get 2 questions and you must choose one. Please do not answer both questions. The other difference is that it is an essay question, so you do not get an extract to respond to. You just get an essay question, and then you have to think about the best way to respond to that. Now, you do get bullet points for tips and things to think about that they'd like you to include in your response. So if we look at one example here, how does Orwell present Old Major and his vision in Animal Farm? Write about how Orwell presents Old Major and his vision, how Orwell uses the character of Old Major to explore ideas about socialism. So this example would want you to talk about Old Major, want you to talk about his vision, and want you to talk about socialism. So how do we structure it? Exactly the same way as what we've looked at before. Your AO1 paragraph from somewhere at the start of the novel. It can be a quote or a specific reference. And then you're going to do an AO1 paragraph from somewhere else, likely to be the middle or the end of the novella. Now, the reason is you want to show the exam board that you've read the whole text, that you understand the whole text, and that you can refer to different parts. If both AO1 paragraphs were only from the beginning of the text, it may appear that you're not quite sure about what happens elsewhere. So you're going to AO1 from the beginning, and I think you might have 1 or 2 references to support what you're saying. You're going to AO1 from somewhere in the middle, towards the end. Then you're going to AO2 paragraph, and it's likely to be all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, and you're going to bend it towards the question again. And then you're going to, if you have time, AO2, a 4th paragraph, again, bent towards the question. Your AO3 will be weaved in where it's relevant. Moving on then to poetry. Now, poetry, you get 1 question, so you don't get a choice. You get a printed poem in front of you, which you will compare with another of your choice, and that's going to be from memory. And it will be answered with relation to a specific question. It's worth 30 marks, and it's going to go in exactly the same way. So AO1 paragraph from the named printed poem in front of you, and it is likely that you're going to use an exact quote for that because it's right there. Then you're going to AO1 paragraph from a poem from memory, with a specific reference if you can, but just a general reference, a specific reference is fine. So it might be in Farmer's Bride when the bride locks herself in the attic or sleeps in the attic, a very specific reference. Then you're going to AO2 from the name poem in front of you, and you're going to AO2 from the one from memory. And we sort of really do promote here that you do the 4 paragraphs. You're going to AO3 the context, which is going to be weaved in where it's relevant. Now, unseen poetry. Sorry about that, not sure what happened. So back to it. Unseen poetry. Part 1. You get given a poem that you've never seen before. There is no choice in the question, and you just answer one question, and it's a very specific question. For example, how does the poet present feelings about age? And you write 2 AO1 paragraphs and 2 AO2 paragraphs. And this is where I guess it just depends on how you respond and react, your personal response to the poem. So you pick a quote which best shows a feeling, and you pick another quote which shows a different feeling. Then you pick a quote where there's a nice juicy method in there, perhaps a simile or a metaphor, and you analyse that method. And then you do the same again, 4 paragraphs. Part 2, there is also no choice. It's one question, but you're given a second shorter poem, and you have to compare to the one in part 1. So you compare the AO2 methods in both poems. Your paragraph is likely to look like what's in brackets there. It's 2 to quiz, really. So, for example, the writer in the first poem uses a metaphor, which is this, to show this, this and this. And this is different to the poet in the second poem, which uses a metaphor to show this, this and this. So it can be a similarity or a difference. And you're going to write 1 paragraph, and it's going to sort of compare the methods the writer uses. Okay, so we're going to have a little practice now. So what I want you to do is have a look at this slide. Think about the theme of family in A Christmas Carol. I want you to jot down all of the events or characters which communicate ideas about family. Be specific in your reference. Don't worry about the other AOs, just focus on AO1 and jot down as many references or important things or important characters that happen in relation to family. And so I'm going to pause the video here. You're going to take some time and you're going to do a mind map for me of all the times that family appears in A Christmas Carol. Okay, I'm going to give you another 5 minutes, and what I've done on this slide is just added those bullet points that remind you of things to talk about in relation to AO1. So I want you to have a think about it, really think about family in A Christmas Carol, think about the question, think about themes, think about who communicates family and when family is communicated, and I'd like you to jot down as many different ideas as you can. Okay, so family in A Christmas Carol. These are the times I could think of as for when family occurs in A Christmas Carol. Fred is Scrooge's family, but he treats him badly. And this could also be linked to the death of Fan, who was his little sister. The AO1, another AO1 point is the Cratchit family. They celebrate Christmas even though they don't have much money, but they're together and that's all that matters on Christmas Day. It tells us that Christmas doesn't just have to be about money, and it's about spending time with loved ones, and it highlights the importance of family. Families are often together at Christmas time in A Christmas Carol despite their living conditions. For example, the miners that live in the bowels of the earth, those men with their horny hands at the lighthouse, they too celebrate Christmas, and they celebrate because they're together. Belle is happier when she's surrounded by family, and she rejects the idea of money and in order to be with family, and she prioritises that. Baby Scrooge is neglected by his family, and that in some way impacts the way he is as an adult. Dickens perhaps commenting on wealth and childhood there. Scrooge's grave is neglected because he rejected family. And he becomes a second father to Tiny Tim. So lots of examples when family occurs in A Christmas Carol. Now what I'd like you to do is grab a different colour and add in any AO3 ideas, so anything about social and historical times in relation to family in A Christmas Carol. So what did Dickens think of family? What was his own family like? What was family life like during Victorian times? And can a modern day reader relate to the representation of family? I'd like you to pause the video, have a good 5 minutes, look at those AO1 quotes, and I want you to jot down what you can add in terms of social and historical context, those AO3 ideas in relation to family. Pause this video now. So, what could we add to our already quite big mind map? Well, I've added that Fred shows the reader that male members of the bourgeoisie don't have to be horrible. This is Scrooge's choice. That they can embrace family life. You don't have to live alone. That the Victorian church taught that poor people were sinners and God has punished them. And so we need to reject those ideas and embrace our family because that's what God would want. That the home was a Victorian haven, a safe place away from all the horrors of the world. That Belle is on the righteous path. She has chosen God and to live a godly life. And she's got a husband and she's got children. She's doing exactly what the Bible tells her to do. That perhaps society is against this hard and cold style of parenting in Victorian times and we should be caring and more loving and softer. A positive representation of the bourgeoisie because the Cratchit family just want to be around their family and they don't care about money. And raising Bob's salary and being a mindful employer means that Tiny Tim lives. So a direct link there between the family life of the poor and the changes an employer can make. Now I'd like you to pause the video again, grab a different colour and add in AO2 quotes. Which of our quotes do you think could apply to the theme of family and how could you make them link to that theme? Pause the video now. Think about all the AO2 quotes from A Christmas Carol. We've got golden idol, golden sunlight, as good as gold and better, hard and sharp as flint, gruff old Belle, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, plundered and bereft, and watched and wept and cared for, solitary as an oyster, light as a feather, and the chain he drew clasped around his middle wound about him like a tail. Think about all those AO2 quotes and I want you to think about the theme of family and which apply best. I think you could talk about As Good as Gold and Better and the importance of family and the importance of Dickens promoting the idea that we should think about one another and be mindful employees and that this directly affects family life and and we can talk about the importance of Tiny Tim to his family. You can obviously link Solitary as an Oyster, sort of the rejection of Fred and family life in favour of being alone. You could talk about Golden Idol and the idea of making money the idol above family and God. And you could also apply Hard and Sharp as Flint. You could talk about Light as a Feather and the idea that he embraces family life at the end of A Christmas Carol, which sort of rids him of any burden and sins that weigh him down. So, on the next slide, I'd like you to pause the slide and I want you to read the model as Solitary as an Oyster. I want you to think about what's good about it, but I'd also like you to think, what could I do to tweak this and make it fit the question of family? Pause the video now, think about why it's good, and jot down all of the ways you could make it fit the theme of family. Okay, this is how I've done it. If you have a look at the sections in red, I've used exactly the same analysis, exactly the same AO2 analysis, and I've added in all of the comments in red that are about family. And if you look, some are longer than others. So a short one, isolated character who rejects the family around him. Some longer ones. Fred wishes to spend Christmas Day with his uncle, thoroughly embracing the institution of family. However, here, Scrooge rejects Fred's offer and wishes to remain alone because he doesn't understand the value family can bring to one's life. So a bit more explained as to why it's about family. But if you look further down, you can see I've just included that he wants to be, or he could be, a good family man. That he needs to think about the poor and those around him, especially his family. That he sends food to the Cratchits and integrates himself into their family and his own. So you take the same AO2 analysis and you just bend it and tweak it by mentioning the whatever theme that is in the question. I'm going to allow you to pause this and just have another reread of it and see how I've made this example fit the theme of family. Okay, so what can you do now? Well, for the rest of the session, or as a revision task, for each theme in A Christmas Carol below, so we've got memory, Christmas and festivity, greed, change and poverty, do exactly as we've just done with family. So jot the theme in the middle of a mind map. I want you to jot down all the AO1 references, how would you bend your AO2 quotes, and what AO3 context would apply. Good luck!